And lovely introduction. I did steal a little bit of the thunder there because I like to joke a little bit about myself. But yes, my name is Ash Coleman. I'm here today talking about the concept of needing directions just in the testing atmosphere. And so we're going to jump into that a little bit. So this is me. This is my cat, Ash Coleman. I'm an engineering manager in San Francisco, California. I work for a company called Credit Karma. I'm also a consultant. I also work with diversity transformation in the agile world, and I'm an enthusiast about it. I love talking about it, so if you ever have questions, please let me know. I am a former chef. I was a chef for 16 years. I catered weddings most of the time or was personal chefing for many people that you might know of the like. But more importantly, I'm a cat lady. And a few dog slides were happening during the conference, so I had to throw a few cats in here. This is my other cat, Bo. They're brother and sister, and I love them so very much. So jumping into this, have you ever wondered about the world that we live in? More so just how it came to be the world that it is today. And I'm not talking about on a political level because we don't have time for that conversation now, but more so on the level of how we got to know the world that exists. It's pretty fascinating if you think about it. There's 7 continents, 5 oceans, mountain ranges, flatlands, valleys, all of the things that makes the world now that we know of, but at one time was a huge mystery for the people that existed on this earth, but were very limited to the space that they were in. So recognizing that understanding the world couldn't happen in one day, there's a history of explorers that went out to help us gather more information about the world that exists. Having little clicker problems there. So on this slide here, there's a few explorers that you might know of. Amelia Earhart, Jacques Cousteau, and Marco Polo are among many that have gone around the world and have documented their findings. A few others of mention, great explorers, Sacagawea in the US, such a great lead for Lewis and Clark to help them discover the United States, helped people understand by their documentation what it was that they were encountering as they led their way across the lands. It gave them a better image about the world that they were living in. They chronicled their experiences as they went and gave a very vivid account of the things that they encountered, letting people know that there's more to just this plot of land that you're on. There's much to explore. Diving further into the unknown, they were able to diagram a new path for us, providing us greater knowledge and understanding about the world we live on, right? It's not just about the world we live in, it's the world we live on. So I always get to this point in my presentation, and I'm going to use a quote of someone that's in this room today, but always asks, why is this relevant, Ash? From their words, they talked about how whenever I give a presentation, there's always this very irrelevant story in the beginning, and then in the end, for some reason, it just becomes magic and everything kind of comes together. So bear with me while we get there. I promise you, it's for a point that I mentioned all of those things. Another point of why this is relevant is we don't know where we're going unless we know where we've been. And if we're not looking to those who came before us to provide us examples about success, then our chances of success go dramatically down. We don't have the ability to be as great as we are if we don't have a platform to start on that has potentially been started from someone else. And so, drawing back to those early pioneers and explorers of the world, it gave us a model of how we could look to the world that's in front of us, even if it's not necessarily about knowing more about the earth that we live on, but about the technology that we encounter. So let me set the scene a little bit for you. We're going to jump into another story, and this is a personal account of a team that I was working on a couple years ago. This team that I was working on was a team of quality engineers in-house, which were varied in skill set from automation engineers to manual testers or quality engineers that we called them. And they would work together to formulate a plan of quality for whichever team or project that they were working on. We also had an offshore team, a team that was based out of India, and that would work on the opposite end of the clock for us to help us to understand what we might have missed during the daytime. They continued that testing process for the rest of the hours that we weren't awake to help us to have that further security about our product in general. So that round-the-clock coverage made it very efficient for us to be able to say that our quality was intact or that we had visibility into where we stood. With this team, we use a test case manager, which one is not really important for this conversation, but we used a test case manager where we held all of our test cases, both automated and manual tests. This provided easy handoff for each team to be able to continue the work that was going on, but also was a living space for the features that were growing within the organization and the product. And so everyone had access to it, everyone could contribute, and tickets could be created off of those test cases and run to make sure that we were recognizing the quality of our product. With this team that I was working on, we were in an organization that was growing rapidly, of which resulted in an organizational transformation. I'm not going to go into the structure of that either, but what I'm going to say is when you have a team that's growing drastically, chances of reorganization is high, and that was exactly the case for us. We recognized that as we organized ourselves around quality, our products continued to grow, and the things that we had kept in order in one place no longer were suitable for the vastness of our product as it continued. So as the team grew, it gave me the opportunity to be able to look at a better structure for what we were working with, really dive into the test cases that were present and see, okay, what do we have here and what does it cover? What can we understand about the way that we've approached quality, and how can we continue to move forward as we do? The team continues to grow, and larger suites become less transparent. In other words, as we were growing, our reorganization wasn't happening as fast as our growth of our product, and so our test suites were growing really large. We had a lot of information in there, and there was no real organization around it. What included many epics or stories became one suite that was just grand in number and not really organization. This equated to less understanding about the quality of the product. And the reason being is because when you look at these test suites and the way that we were using them, when we would hand them off to the team offshore and we would get the information the next day, we would just see a list of failures within the same suite. The suite was defined the product. So what does that really tell you about the quality of the product? That it's kind of failing or that it's not? So, tests for the project grew large. The suites continued to grow, and no one really recognized the organization was getting unkempt. And so, with that lack of transparency, questions around quality continue to come back to us. What are we doing? Where are we going? How are we able to manage this? Are questions that we often got. There was no clear path to coverage, again, because this lack of organization didn't allow us to really look at things and say, this is where we are and this is where we could go. Problems became unclear when we didn't know exactly where the issues were happening because of lack of structure within those test case management tools that helped us to understand this suite is for this particular area of the project. This governs this. There wasn't any of that directing us to what these errors were presenting, and therefore we weren't able to give solid solutions or even analysis of what it was we were testing. We weren't able to secure quality in this time because when we would just get a myriad of errors, all we could say is, we're kind of covered. And of course, I'm sure all of you know that that's not really a valuable answer for anyone who's looking for the overall quality of a project ready to roll out to production. Okay, so as I had the opportunity to start organizing the teams into smaller teams as we grew, we recognized that our test suites needed to follow suit. So we started to break them up. And one of the things that we realized is the large part of the lack of organization that we had came from the fact that we didn't even have names associated with a lot of these suites. They were regression, they were sanity, they were anything that made sense at the time when we created them, but they weren't really descriptive of what was going on in there. And so we asked, what's in a name, right? Shakespeare said it best. The funny thing about having control over naming and having this opportunity to rebuild our suites, was that we had the control to be able to name them. Now, as things go, there are some things that are more obvious to name than others. But when we're talking about technology and we're building a product, that might not be so transparent. And so we move on to recognize we're professionals and we can do this. So we all jump on the same side and we say, we're going to go and we're going to name our own. Now, at this point in the project, we had about 5 teams, of which had their own quality engineers driving the quality methods and process on the teams they were on. They were governing what was happening within those suites. Our test management tool became a place for them to individualize their process and to get in there and to really have their go at creating organization around their testing process. But let's think about this for a minute. As I mentioned earlier, we've got regression, we've got sanity, we've got all these other things, and we're all professionals here, and we've heard those words. But is your interpretation the same as that person's? If they look at the product and they say, okay, what tests are going to be needed to be able to say that we can fully cover this product? And at the end of the day, when the test runs come back positive, we can say that this product is secure. Does that suite actually include everything that's necessary? If it's regression, it should, according to me, but I have a very clear idea of what it should be versus what other people might think. And I think this slide kind of puts it to the test, where professionals were put at task to name these animals once upon a time, and this is kind of what they came up with. Not so accurate, but a good attempt. And I saw that a lot. With my teams, I was looking at the suites and I was realizing, holy cow, these are following exactly what's in here rather than being scalable enough to be able to add additional tests to these suites. And so, putting my thinking cap on, we had to clearly outline the naming structure. We had to recognize, okay, we have these 5 teams and we're all brilliant people, but how are we going to go about doing this so that if this person switches to this team, they're going to be able to jump into this test suite and recognize, I know exactly what this is going to cover. And I know exactly what it means when this title says this, where those tests are going to be placed. Getting on the same page about naming is going to help that organization a lot because it's going to give you at least a file cabinet to put those ideas into, or in this case, those test cases. Each suite represented something specific, a name, and all the tests we're going to follow. So, now that we've organized by name, we got to a place where we were really starting to build out these suites. And we recognized them as being very valuable because we can get really granular in the things that we were including in them. As we went from test case to test case, we realized this actually covers a myriad of information as well. And jumping into those test cases and seeing what the content had in them, it became apparent that what the name of those test cases weren't necessarily suited for anything searchable, right? So it's like, okay, now you understand that you have a regression suite, but what's in that? The only way we could figure that out is by adding an additional layer of transparency. Not wanting to be too specific with the naming process, we resorted to tags. And tags is a really helpful tool because it helps us to be a little bit more granular. It helps us to identify specific features, pages, dates, or attributes about those tests that are included in those suites that will help us to be able to find them when it's imperative. When those times come where the overall organization asks for a sweep of quality for X, Y, and Z products, we can go in and we can query the right tests by way of tags to be able to find what we need. But like naming, this isn't as easy either. So, this is from a favorite show of mine. I know it's not everyone's favorite, but it's Big Bang Theory. I'm a huge fan of Shelton. I don't know if you've seen this episode, but it's really funny. Anyways, so recognizing again, we have 5 different teams and 5 different engineering leads that are going through and naming and tagging all of these tests. We realized that there was no guards around what sort of tags they can include in these, and that created a huge problem. So I included this slide because I want to give a little story, or more so an example. Has anyone played the game Pictionary before? Yeah, get some nods, right? So Pictionary is a game where the lead person or the person who's up goes and grabs a card, and it has a word or a series of words on it, of which are usually culturally context about slang or some sort of phrase or even just a single word or item. And the person's job is to draw the picture and have their team guess. Now, reflecting on your own experiences in Pictionary, I'm gonna guess it's just like mine, where people start throwing out really ridiculous things. And you, as the person who's drawing that picture, are so frustrated because all you're saying is, how can you not get this? This is clearly a bird. But they're throwing all different types of words out there. It's a falcon, it's an eagle, it's a bat, right? That's the exact same thing that happens with tagging, to be completely honest. So when you give people a suite that has all of these test cases in it, they jump in there and they see each individual test case of which maybe they created or not, and they start associating it with tags that they identify with, not necessarily the things that are identified within maybe the tickets, the vision, or the mission statement. But that even presents a problem. Are your mission statements thorough enough for you to be able to say all of these tags are what we're going to apply to this particular case? And the likely answer to that is no as well. So that was a really big issue for us. So thinking about the mini teams, it got really messy, incredibly messy. There were syntax errors on some of the tags that we were throwing out there. Some were caps, some were not. Some were multiple words with spaces, some were not. And so this led to an even bigger bank of tags that we had with no organization around it further than what we already were in. So basically, we just did all this work, and quite honestly, we were in no better position than we were from the jump. So what happens then? Well, having a source of truth is helpful. So as we see all these files here, there's some organization in there, even though it looks like a huge mess. And that's eventually what we got to be completely honest. We used an in-house API system to be able to store all of our tags. But first, we had to rally around and figure out what those tags actually were going to be. What was important to us, what was important to the business to know what was searchable? How could we provide more transparency with each of these tags? How could we get in there and say, okay, I need to find everything that's applicable to this from our product? And you would be able to query that and find all of the tests that were, run the suite and figure out what the quality was, or at least have an idea about it. Another thing, different organizations handled this differently. But for the most part, if you're within the same organization, the hope is that you can come to a conclusion together about what your tagging is going to be. In other words, what's your structure going to be like? How are you going to approach this process? And then you can have that singular source of truth to help you as you continue to scale with your teams. So what now? We're all wondering where this is going. Well, with this team, as we built this out, we realized we had cleaner suites, which was a win for us. As we continued to go through this organizational transformation, each team had complete power and control. They had test suites with proper names. They had it organized. They could search it. Tags were in place, and people were able to use the test suites both in-house as well as offshore, which was another huge win for us, because before then it was complete chaos. The coverage on a high level was identifiable, and we could absolutely go in and we can search, but then we get into the question about what does it really tell you when these things are passing and failing? And so this is another opportunity that I had on this particular team. As we grew these suites out and we continued to look at them and see what they had to say to us as far as this test is failing, this test is not, the question then became, when we got that report back in the morning from offshore that said that X test and Y tests were failing, what did that mean? What we usually got was, hey Ash, so test X and test Y are failing. That wasn't really enough information for me to do anything about it, to be completely honest. And so looking at the test case, I realized this title also doesn't really provide me any information as well. And so this brings us into what I'm going to call error handling, right? So adding that additional information within that test case to be able to identify very key attributes about that test to say exactly what's going on in it. So we formulated a method of being able to not only tag these tests, but include additional information that helped us to understand what it was that was failing, when it was failing. This was actually an amazing turnaround for us, because with this process, we were able to not only identify that tests were failing, we were able to say what in fact it was that was failing, which is a completely different story than saying that a test is just not working. And in some cases, it wasn't necessarily about the test failing, it was about maybe we should just keep a closer eye on this. Because as we know, automated checks aren't really doing much but telling us whether we've regressed or stayed in place based on the last action that's happened in our development process. So let me start getting more relevant about the things that I've shared. When we started to add this additional information into our test suites and into our test cases, we realized that it started to slim down the time it was taking us to handle these errors that we were receiving. We could come into the office in the morning and we can see what information was being dropped on our desk from offshore, stating that X, Y, and Z tests were failing, but then as we went into those tests, we realized that covers this, this, and this. That information provides us a ton, to be completely honest. And when you're responsible for reporting on the quality of your products, you need to know as much information as soon as possible, because time is of the essence. It's an expensive feat to be able to get through issues, especially ones that you don't really know much about. And so if you're just calling out features that are failing, it's not really doing much for you when you have to investigate and get all the additional information. When blockers would come in the morning, because that would happen on occasion, the question then became, am I getting enough information to know whether this is a high priority blocker or not? If a feature is completely failing, then okay, that's fine, but is this our login? Is this our registration? Or is this a color on a button? And so that additional information from adding information through the error handling provides us that at a moment's notice. We can look at it and we can say, all right, I've got all the tools here to be able to communicate to business and tell them that this is failing, but based on where this test was, we don't have to worry about it right away. Our turnaround or our recovery can take a little bit longer because it's not going to make or break our product. And of course, that's the call of business, but it gives us a little bit more information to work with as we go and we talk about the quality of our products. So being descriptive in our tests helped me to understand the hours of investigation could be slimmed down. That was valuable enough to be able to take a few additional moments to talk with business, to talk with the team, to see what exactly was being covered in that test case, to be able to add it to the suite. It helped us get to solutions sooner. We could better communicate around the error. That's pretty much what we're here for. As engineers, our job is identifying how we can do things better, because we're always going to find fault in it. The question is, how are we going to recover from that? The errors outlined by tests define areas of coverage, services hit, intersecting code, even users that are affected. And this was something that was really important for us as well. How many users were affected? We used our metrics to be able to build out a test case suite that helped us understand how many users were going to be affected by this particular test failing. And that helped us to be able to prioritize things immediately. It was no longer an investigation into our metrics to say, this feature covers this many. We knew right away, so we can get to that solution faster. And then we can assess the priority of it. How important is this to fix right away? So, getting closer, what does this all look like in practice? Now, what do we need to create this map? I talked a little bit about exploring earlier today, and so I'm going to bring that back around. Let's go back to the beginning. Testers are like explorers, right? So there's the full circle. Testers are like explorers. This is a map of Marco Polo's early adventures. This is what he came home with. This. It's not very different than what exists today in the maps that we have. He was able to go out, find the grounds, record what he saw, and create a standard for those who were coming after him. In some cases, it was dangerous. It presented a lot of risk. He was unsure about the ability to get home or to get through or to get over in some cases when it came to rough terrain. But he documented all of these things in hopes not only that he could have a clear vision of what he was up to, but for anyone else who wanted to take on the journey and join in, they would have a clear understanding as well, or at least a better one than they had before. As he journeyed, he outlined the land and assigned it to what he knew. He gave it a name, right? He then went into further detail about the important features about the area he had outlined with the name, tagging attributes about the area that were significant, terrain, water sources, landscape, and then later went on to describe his travels by way of description that helped others to know the quality of the land, helping others to divert from danger or fall into errors, and direct to a successful path. That's what testers do, right? So, they are explorers of code, and through their journeys provide a map of quality. So a summary: learning the lay of the land, getting in there and really seeing what quality is being covered. What does your coverage plan look like? What are you able to contribute to the conversation of quality? Give it a name. Give it a place to begin. Leading the way. By way of tags, it made us able to get in there and figure out what we wanted to learn about our code. We could query pretty much anything at the point after we had created a tag system, and we could cover anything at a moment's notice, leading the way to a better conversation around quality. Reaching desired location, course correction and error handling, right? When we talk about getting where we want to go, we're going to definitely talk about the specifics of getting there and all of the pitfalls we've had along the way. They're going to be learning opportunities, but they're also going to better help us to understand the quality of where we are. And that is the explorers of testers, I suppose. Any questions?
Thank you very much. So let me see, what questions have you submitted? So how do you balance clarity and length of a name?
That is a great question. So this exercise that we did when we were talking about the naming convention of these suites, we all sat in the room, every single lead sat in the room together, and we threw out the information that was the most important to them. We asked questions such as, if someone were to look at this, would they be able to identify? And that was the main objective, is if we're naming something, is it going to be descriptive of everything that's within the content? Or is it going to be something that leads to more questions? And so as far as clarity is concerned, it's defining what exactly would be clear for you, and then moving through that process of figuring it out as a team. Now, as far as the length is concerned, when it came to suites, we didn't really have any length restrictions because it was just about the maintenance of the tests. But if you're talking about tickets, of which we did at the same time, because we were changing the structure of which we were sending information to offshore, then we had to recognize that these were going to be searchable as well. And so we don't want to get too carried away with how many words we include in that. We wanted to make sure that it was precise and it was descriptive, but not too long where people can do it at a moment's notice. So it's about reciprocity and getting through that process over and over again.
Okay, so I would go with the first one, I don't know why. But do you mix in test types functional and performance in a suite?
In the suite, no. So in the suite themselves, no, we don't do that. We get that sort of information within each individual feature that we send off. So if it's about running the functional performance testing, then we include that within the ticket level, what you should expect, what you should not.
Okay, and let's see this one. How fine-grained do you suggest test suites to be created?
It depends on what you're testing. One of the things that I always talk about is the minimal releasable unit. So what is the smallest feature that you're going to be able to release, and then that's how granular you can get. If you're staying organized around that, then you recognize that you'll have more tests within the suite, but you'll also know that you'll be a little bit more granular with the information that comes back that can be more descriptive about what's faulting.
Great. And finally, do you have a blog or place where you show screenshots of your workflow?
I don't. I should.
Not even a Twitter
I'm
channel?
on Twitter, Coleman30.
Okay, and do you share, or will you share screenshots?
I will share some screenshots.
Lovely.
You can also DM me. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Lovely. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Please take this small gift. It's a actually, I've never said this one. It's a mug with your face, with your portrait on it.
Awesome.
So use it. Thank you very much for coming.
You.